we feed the same quantity of concentrate, but feed that earlier in the lifetime, so let's say in the first grazing season, and then fed the animals right through to slaughter with grass only, we saw equivalent carcass weight to the animals that were fed grass and concentrate at the end of the second grazing season. So an interesting result insofar as it indicated that, the feeding pattern of concentrate could be modified and still retain the same level of carcass output.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and I'm joined by Dr. Paul Crosson, Enterprise Leader at Teagasc Grange, to reflect on the research being carried out in 2025 and plan for 2026. Paul, you're very welcome. Before we start, can you give an overview of 2025?
So a very, very good year, 2025, and I'm sure reflecting what most farmers around the country found in terms of, the weather was very favourable, grass growing conditions were good, utilisation was excellent, animals performed well. So overall, a very good year. We grew, probably if you look across our various platforms, on our suckler systems platforms, we grew a little over 12 tonnes per hectare. That's on the Derrypatrick and Maternal Herd. And on the dairy calf to beef platform, about 13.7 tonnes. So you might ask why the difference. Well, we'll get to that. But the dairy calf to beef tends to be stocked a little bit higher than the suckler system. So fertilizer application will be greater and so on. But overall, animals performed well. Grass growth was excellent and a very good year. I should say, of course, that, probably the main focus isn't the absolute performance. We're really looking at the comparison between different treatments, So let's say, for example, when I get to the Derrypatrick grass clover versus grass only systems and so on. So it's the comparison that we're really interested in. But of course, it's much more enjoyable for the team when the sun is on your back, grass is growing well, animals performing well.
Phenomenal growth there, Paul. And as you mentioned, the Derrypatrick herd. What are the most recent findings from the Derrypatrick herd?
Yeah, so the Derrypatrick herd, Catherine, is currently looking at grass clover versus grass only systems. We know that we have, very ambitious targets to reduce nitrogen use across the agri-food sector and across the livestock sector. And we also have, important climate targets to meet. So one way we can do this is to reduce the amount of nitrogen that we use. And that's one of the focuses of the Derrypatrick herd in the context of grass clover systems, where less nitrogen is used than grass only systems. So in that case, we're looking at grass only with 150 kilos of N per hectare, or grass clover with 75 kilos of N per hectare. A second factor in this study, and again reflecting our national policy, if you like, is to develop systems that involve, good levels of output or high levels of output while also achieving early finishing ages. So within the Derrypatrick herd, we're looking at, finishing at 19 months of age with low levels of concentrate input. So those are the two main focus areas in the Derrypatrick. Finishing early with less nitrogen.
And reducing the use of concentrates there that you mentioned, what does that relate to?
Yes, so really in those two systems, Catherine, the only concentrate would be fed to the progeny during the first winter. So they're finished. So these are weanlings that go into the shed. They'll receive 1.5 kilos over the first winter per day. And then right through to finishing, there'll be no additional concentrates fed. So they'll be finished off grass only or grass clover only. And you might ask, what's the commercial relevance of that? Well, really what we're trying to do is test the pastures to its fullest. So if we supplemented the animals at pasture, you would kind of dilute the effect, if you like, or mask the effect of the pasture. So to allow the pasture to be expressed in its fullest, we finish the animals on pasture only. And in that context, we're achieving, probably depends on the year, or definitely depends on the year to some extent, somewhere between 10 and 15 kilos additional carcass on the grass clover system relative to the grass only system. So really showing the potential of grass clover systems with less nitrogen to support excellent levels of animal performance.
That's great performance, Paul. Farmers will be aware of the maternal herd. What's the current research project looking at?
Yeah, so the maternal herd is looking at, I suppose, another area of from a policy point of view of very high importance, and that is, how can we develop strategies that give us a better likelihood of calving first at 2 years of age? We know that average age at first calving in the suckler herd is in and around 30 and a half months of age. The target is 24 months of age. So what we're trying to do in the maternal herd is to see can we develop nutritional strategies, management strategies that give us, if you like, a better opportunity to meet that target of 2-year-old cattle. What that involves is nutritional supplementation in the first grazing season. So calves are supplemented with an additional 1.5 kg or 1.5 kg compared to zero from 4 to 8 months of age. So that's really testing the animal model. Within the animal model, we have early and late maturing breed types on the maternal herd. That's the sire breeds. And we're testing to see, will that nutritional strategy provide us with a better likelihood of achieving earlier puberty and calving at 2 years of age? To do that, one of the interesting aspects of this study, Catherine, is that we're looking at sex semen, so female sex-sorted semen, because really what we want to do is generate as many females as possible, so that it gives us more power in our experiment to test that, hypothesis. Can we achieve earlier puberty with that nutritional supplementation, or to what extent can we achieve earlier puberty with additional supplementation?
And how do you think that could be implemented on farms on the ground?
Yeah, well, I suppose farmers are already supplementing in and around the weaning period, that transition period to minimize stress levels. So normally you will get sort of that 4 weeks pre, 2 weeks post weaning that you will have supplementation. This is really introducing supplementation earlier than normally would be the case. So it's readily implementable, if you like. So it's a very practical measure. It basically entails advancing your nutrition and supplementation a little bit earlier in the calf's life, and if that allows us to advance first calving by 6 months, for example, or the practical reality is in a seasonal calving system where you're spring calving animal, and retaining from within the herd, if you miss that window to calve at 2 years of age, you're potentially looking at 3-year-old calving. So that's potentially a 12-month slippage in terms of calving age. That's animals being managed and fed and so on and so forth for an additional 12 months. So if some additional supplementation will allow us to avoid that additional year of managing the heifer, then that will be a really, really significant saving from a profit point of view, as well as in terms of the environmental overhead of that heifer being carried for additional 12 months.
That's great, Paul. And regarding the dairy calf to beef research that's underway in Grange, what are the key differences you're seeing between early maturing breeds and late maturing breeds in dairy beef systems?
Yeah, well, so far we have one full cycle completed on that, Catherine. So it's probably, we probably need a couple of cycles. Typically what we will do on our systems experiments is run them for 2, 3, or maybe more cycles. The reason being that, we've seen this in recent years, you can get very, very significant year effects. So 1 year, you could be impacted by adverse weather conditions as we had in 23, the later half of 23 and into 24. And you could get a year like this year, which was really, really excellent. And you got good animal performance across our studies. So we have one full cycle complete in dairy calf to beef of the current study. In that, we're looking at 2 animal maturity levels, as you mentioned, Catherine. We have early maturing, that's Angus and Hereford, and late maturing Limousin and Belgian Blues. And these are sire breeds on the dairy herd, being used on the dairy herd. So these are dairy beef progeny. What we have found is, really what we're finding in terms of carapace weights, in and around 300 kilos across those genotypes. For our continental type animals, about 316 for our blues, 316 for our Limousin. So, identical for the 2 continental or late maturing breed types. For early maturing breed types, a little bit lighter. So our Angus are coming in at 308 and our Hereford at 294 kilos carcass. So, all performing very, very well. These are slaughtered at the end of the second grazing season. So these are slaughtered reasonably young, these cattle. So to achieve 300 kilos, thereabouts, a little bit more for continental late maturing breeds, a little less, I suppose, on average for our early maturing, is really excellent performance.
You're planning a new study on dam and sire genetic merit. What do you hope to uncover about dairy beef progeny performance?
Yeah, we will complete the second cycle of the current experiment on dairy calf to beef this year. So the next phase of that study then will be to focus, I suppose, more on, we see from the dairy breeding objective, very, very somewhat divergent, I suppose. If we look at the dam types that are being used on the dairy herd, we have, a kind of a national average EBI type animal. We also have, I suppose, more extreme, if you like, elite EBI Holstein Friesian animals. And then in some cases we have Jersey use, so the Holstein Friesian crossed with Jersey. Probably a smaller element of the total population, but still quite important in certain herds and in certain cohorts of farmers. So what we are going to look at is a comparison of those three dam types. So that national average type animal compared with an elite type animal, effectively trying to model what the future national herd might look like, and that Holstein Friesian crossed with the Jersey. Of course, those cow types will be quite different in terms of beef merit. So what is the impact of, alternative beef breeding policy if we put two sire types on those three cow types? So we're going to look at a high beef genetic merit Angus and a lower beef merit Angus. So putting those two sire types on those three cow types, now we end up with 6 different animal groups, implement them on our overall dairy beef systems platform, and to assess the potential of those 6 genotypes to perform in dairy calf to beef systems.
It'll be interesting to see, Paul, the findings from that study. What research is currently underway relating to early life nutrition and supplementation strategies for dairy beef systems?
Yes, so I suppose it's an area of very significant interest at the moment, given the increasing numbers of dairy beef progeny coming through and the increasing contribution of dairy beef to our overall beef output. So on the early life side, we've looked at alternative nutritional strategies both during the milk replacer feeding period and immediately post milk replacer feeding. So during that, if you like, that rearing, that pre-weaning phase, so when the animals are still on milk replacer, we've looked at a higher and a moderate milk replacer feeding level. The moderate being our standard 750 grams of milk powder per day, and our high being 1.5 kilos of milk powder per day. So we've compared those two, and then immediately post-weaning off milk powder, we've looked at a high and a low concentrate feeding rate. The high being ad-lib concentrate feeding and the low being 1.5 kilos of concentrate feeding. So that brings us up to a turnout to pasture, and post-turnout to pasture, these animals were managed right through to finish in the same system effectively. So we had 2 pre-weaning, so 2 milk replacer feeding, and those 2 groups got alternative post-weaning concentrate feeding levels. And they were finished in calf to beef bull systems. What we found in terms of those alternative systems was that, we got no real advantage, a very small advantage to that additional milk replacer feeding. So going from 750 to 1.5 kilos per day, when we analysed that through to slaughter, there was no advantage or a very small advantage in terms of body weight and carcass weight of that additional feeding. But we did get an advantage of that post-weaning additional meal feeding, something in the order of 16 kilos of carcass. So, in other words, where we fed, when adequate quantities of milk replacer was fed, and that was 750 grams per day, increasing above that to 1.5 kilos gave us no additional advantage. But moving from 1.5 kilos of concentrate to ad-lib concentrate for that 4 weeks immediately post-weaning did give us an advantage at slaughter in the order of 16 kilos of carcass. So that was very significant. Of course, most of our calf to beef progeny are finished in steer beef systems, greater contribution of pasture to the system, and finished at usually towards the back end of the second grazing season at 19 to 20 months of age, or indeed out of the shed at probably 22 to 24 months of age. So again, we have a study where we're looking at alternative feeding patterns for steer beef systems taken through to finish at the end of the second grazing season. We still have to collate the data from that just finished just this season, just passed. So we'll have more information on that shortly. But I suppose in terms of the carcass data that came from those systems, what we found was that the additional concentrate feeding, particularly at the end of that second grazing season compared to grass only, did give us a benefit in the order of 10 kilos of carcass. So you do see the benefit of that concentrate feeding at the end of the second grazing season. Alternatively, if we feed the same quantity of carcass or of concentrate, but feed that earlier in the lifetime, so let's say in the first grazing season, and then fed the animals right through to slaughter with grass only, we saw equivalent carcass weight to the animals that were fed grass and concentrate at the end of the second grazing season. So an interesting result insofar as it indicated that, the feeding pattern of concentrate could be modified and still retain the same level of carcass output.
That's very interesting finding, Paul. I know a key area across all the systems, be it suckler beef and dairy calf to beef, is reduced in finishing age. The national finishing age has been reduced by about 1.4 months. How much scope is there for farmers to further reduce this without compromising on carcass weight?
Yeah, I think there is enormous scope there, Catherine. If we look across our demonstration farm programs, where we're slaughtering our cattle on those high performing farms, in the order of 5 to 6 months earlier, with no reduction in carcass weight. So we have to try and, assess and quantify why are we not achieving that across a wider cohort of farms and a wider cohort of animals. And really we can. There is a very large scale project funded by the Department of Agriculture, Beef Quest, led from Grange, and what we are looking at is, what are the key farm and animal level drivers of performance. So far, we have completed a very large-scale animal and farm study. We've been on farm for the last probably 12 to 18 months, measuring everything that moves on the farm effectively. So animal performance, obviously pen dimensions, pen size, head space during indoor feeding periods, live weight performance at different stages in the life cycle, quality of feed being offered at different stages of the year, and so on. And what we have found is, if you compare the top and bottom third of farm groups, something in the order of 100 days potential difference in carcass weight or in finishing age between those different cohorts. So what we want to do now is pull together much more of that information around the infrastructural parameters on the farm, the feed quality parameters on the farm, and to see which of those relate more closely to animal performance. So in other words, what are the key drivers of performance at farm level that are impacting on finishing age?
That links in with reducing emissions on farms as well. How realistic is it that feed additives could help beef farmers reduce methane at scale, do you think?
I think there's a lot of potential there, Catherine, but there's a lot of work still to be done. We have carried out quite a bit of work at Grange, looking at different pastures. I mentioned grass clover versus grass only. We've just completed a large study on multi-species pastures and so on. So we're looking at the different impact that pastures can have, and that's a very practical way that we could reduce emissions if there was a pasture management factor, whereby it would be, you might be implementing the pasture management strategy for other reasons, let's say. But if for example, animal performance or lower nitrogen and so on and so forth, but if that also brought with it lower methane emissions, that would be a real benefit. If we look at the supplementation strategy, we already know that concentrate supplementation will reduce methane emissions. But of course, there's a trade-off with economics for one thing, and also with whole of life cycle, if you like, greenhouse gas emissions, because the additional concentrates also come with emissions associated with producing those concentrates. So we have to try and strike a balance there. And then the last area where we're looking at in terms of methane mitigation is around feed additives. Again, there are some very well tested and proven additives that will reduce methane emissions. The challenge for us as an industry is, can we implement those readily in grazing systems? And that's not straightforward. Most of our supplementation strategies, or most of our feed additive strategies, require the animal to have access to the feed additive at all times. Obviously, in grazing scenarios where you might be maybe supplementing once a day, if you're in a dairy calf to beef system, or in a creep weanling scenario, or whatever the case might be, where you have short periods where you have access to concentrate supplementation, that only gives us limited scope to deploy these additives. So the challenge for us is to try and develop, longer term strategies, particularly in grazing systems, where animals can be provided access to feed additives.
That's great, Paul. And I suppose looking to 2026 across all the different research programs, be it suckler beef, dairy calf to beef, and what you've discussed there in relation to finish and age and feed additives. What do you think are the key areas of focus for 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, so we have new phases of a number of our studies commencing next year, Catherine. We have a new phase of Derrypatrick commencing next year. As I said, we are finding differences or benefits in favour of grass clover systems. It varies from year to year. We want to delve a little bit further into this. So when are the benefits being captured, and how can we ensure that the benefits at turnout, in particular what we see is early in the season where at turnout we're seeing large benefits in favour of grass clover, and in some years the grass only system is narrowing that gap at slaughter. So we want to see can we retain some of that advantage, and the next phase of Derrypatrick will delve a little bit more into that, particularly in the context of red clover silage feeding. Can we retain some of the benefits of that red clover silage feeding, or how much of that benefit can we retain at slaughter? I mentioned the dairy calf, the beef system, and we're looking at the new phase of that next year, which is focusing on dairy cow breed types. On feed additives, we have a number of new studies. We have a study co-funded with DAERA and DAFM, CLE beef, so client-friendly beef. In that case, we're looking at the lab evaluation of methane mitigation, of the methane mitigation potential of feed crops. And also I mentioned, the deployment and grazing systems. So we'll be looking at novel delivery mechanisms for some of these feed additives. So, licks and water deployment and so on. How practical are they and how effective are they? We want to look at those in the context of feed additives. So we have quite a few new phases of some of those studies commencing next year. And of course, in the context of finishing age, I mentioned already delving a little bit more into that data to see what are the key drivers of finishing age between farm systems. We have a major open day next year, Catherine, on Wednesday the 1st of July. We look forward to seeing hopefully all your listeners there and many more. And we'll be focusing on all of those new research projects and much, much more. Some of the results that I touched on there earlier in terms of the projects that are just coming to completion. We'll have much more detail of that at our open day on the 1st of July next year at Grange.
That's great, Paul. Some very interesting research completed, and we're looking forward to hearing what's coming down the line. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Paul for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.